To start out with, I want to introduce Phil Rumrill, and I could take all of his time by giving his background, so I won't do that. But Phil is a professor at the University of Kentucky in the Department of Rehabilitation and Special Education. He's also the research director for the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. Prior to joining the University of Kentucky, he was at Kent State, and there he founded and directed the Center for Disability Studies. And he's also been involved as a director of the Multiple Sclerosis Employment Assistance Services. Over the course of his career, Phil has authored and directed 306 research articles, 16 different books, 56 book chapters, has made over 570 presentations internationally to different groups regarding disability, employment, career development, and transition. He has had over 43 research grants that have been directed at studying and addressing issues related to employment of people with chronic health conditions and disabilities. And one of his recent projects is a NIDLR-funded project that was designed to address promoting seamless transition for post-school outcomes of young adults with significant disabilities. In addition to his appointments that I've mentioned, he's also had visiting professor or visiting scholar appointments at the University of Pittsburgh, Ohio State, the University of Leeds Medical School in England, the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and the Arla Institute in Finland. He's lectured, as I mentioned, extensively, and I would say this, as I introduce Phil, I think outside of all of those accomplishments that are very impressive, I think what's really important with Phil is he's really driven the field. His work has really driven the field in terms of helping us as rehabilitation counseling professionals and as special educators understand the issues related to career development, employment, and employer practice as it relates to people with disabilities. So it's my pleasure at this time to introduce Phil Rumrill as our first speaker.
Take it from here. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Champaign. Champaign, Urbana, Champaign. Where are we? We're in Champaign, right? Yes. Wow. Dr. Strausser, thank you so very much. I didn't know David was keeping track of all that stuff, but I'm glad that he is, and I just realized just now that I now know who I want to write my obituary. He has a way of making people sound a lot better than they really are, and Dave, I hope I don't need it anytime soon, but I'll pay you in advance for your work on that. How's that? So thank you. That was far, far too kind. Thanks to Dr. Strausser and Dr. Diamond for making my trip here to Illinois possible. Been here a few times over the years, and it's always great to visit. Thank the Illinois Board of Education as well for making this program today possible, and it's just a great honor and privilege for me to be here with you all today. And David's going to be advancing the slides. Don't advance it yet, but everything's in order over there. Okay, great. Thank you. I hear there's about 140 folks coming to the conference. That's really terrific. I'm here with my wife, Amy. We ran away from home in the Akron area, and we're here for a few days, and glad to be here. One of the things that occurred to me the last time I was here out in the prairie, right? That's what, can I call it that? I mean, it's pretty flat, right? But it's beautiful scenery. It really is, you know. And just last night we were talking about, you don't hear that about, you know, central Illinois, just like you don't hear it about northeast Ohio. You know, it's not known for that. But it's really quite lovely. And we opened the window in our hotel here at the I Hotel, and they asked us if we wanted a room with a view, and we said we would. And so we took a picture out the window. I want to show you, David, please. What do you think? Is that gorgeous or what? David, would you mind just visually describing this in case anyone can't see it?
A picture of a body of water and a boat.
Okay, maybe that's not Champaign, is it? That's San Diego Harbor. I'm sorry, that was the last trip we went on. Here's the one that we took, right, David? Next one? No, that's Sedona, Arizona. Okay, well, you get my point anyway, but I will say that your scenery compares very favorably to 4 photos Amy and I took as we were headed out of Akron, Ohio, just, was it 2 days ago? Yes, on Saturday. Go to the next slide, David. This is what we look at every day out our window at home in the Akron area. And David, would you mind describing these 4 for the crowd?
Industrial ruin. Probably the
Yes.
best one.
You've been to Akron then? Yes. We have a tire dump, I think, a train that's come off the track. It's a smokestack, right, from a factory that may or may not be working any longer, and I think some beleaguered-looking folks, right, there on the end. So anyway, you see why we're glad we didn't get out of the Midwest exactly, but we're glad to see something different. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you. The next slide, David, does it say a little about me? Is that where we're at? Okay. Dr. Strausser already told you more about me than you ever need to know, so I won't belabor this slide very much, but just a little by way of background. I grew up in a small town in Vermont and attended college, bachelor's and master's degrees at Keene State College in New Hampshire, graduate school, and my doctorate at the University of Arkansas. And Dr. Strausser mentioned I currently work at the University of Kentucky. My research interests focus primarily on the education and employment of people with disabilities, so that's why I'm glad to be here with all of you today. We have begun to do some work in kind of disability issues across the lifespan, and when you look at lifespan perspectives on disability, you inevitably and invariably have to start talking about aging, and the older I get, the more I become interested in aging, because I hope to be doing that for a long time, right? Charles Barkley said, you know, any presentation that quotes Charles Barkley, you know that's not necessarily very sophisticated, but he said, I love old people, I hope to be one someday, you know, so, and that's my goal, but we've been studying that a little bit too, and that's at a different end of the continuum than a lot of the work that you're doing, but the notion of transitions really applies to that, you know, to that population as well. And the place I work at, the University of Kentucky, we focus on disability issues really across the lifespan, and so it's been good to look at these kinds of perspectives and indeed employment as it applies to older people, because people are putting off retirement, or they were up until the time of the pandemic anyway, right? Until later in life than ever before, people living longer and more comfortable lives and often having the health that's required to continue working. So we see larger numbers of older workers for various reasons wanting to continue. And we apply many of the same principles to people who are kind of re-energizing their careers as we do to folks who are, you know, just getting them started. So that's just an interesting part of looking at the kind of lifespan, life space perspective on disability. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. I also want to tell you that I am a grateful beneficiary of the services and supports that you all provide to people with disabilities, and particularly in the transition area. When I was 15, I acquired a neurological condition called Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, and I became legally blind over about an 8-week period. In the middle of my high school, I was otherwise healthy, you know, prior to that, had normal vision up until that time, and over the course of the summer before my last year of high school, this condition manifested itself, and I went from having, you know, fairly normal vision to not being able to read headlines in a newspaper, print, you know, this size, and that's still what my vision is today, which is why David is gracious enough to help me navigate the visuals and that kind of thing. But my dad was a logger in Vermont. My mom was a beautician, hard-working people, but they didn't know anything about disability, small rural state, so issues of transportation, technology at that time wasn't what it is now, and we really just didn't know what to do. So I was having to kind of reorient my last year of high school and what I might do after that, and what the job market would look like for someone with this particular condition. I went back to my high school for my senior year of high school, and that's when I learned all I wanted to know at that time, of course, about transition services and supports. But my school accommodated me in various ways, allowed me to stay in the courses that I had planned to take during my senior year. I was connected early on with a vocational rehabilitation counselor from the State Services Division for the Blind, is what they called them at that time, and helped me with orientation and mobility services, a peer counselor just to kind of process. I talked with a guy who had gone through something similar about 10 years before. That was very, very helpful. Learned to type, which I didn't know how to do at that time, and I got a rudimentary, one of the first small Toshiba laptop computers, and all because of the connection that our school guidance counselor, our school special education director, the transition coordinator for the county where I lived, and the state voc rehab program helped me with all of those things. I learned to eat without it being too conspicuous, and Amy, my wife, is over there. She's like, you didn't learn very well necessarily, but they tell you your steak is at 9 o'clock and the peas are at 2 o'clock, and I forgot some of those things about how to put the peas onto a spoon with a knife and all of that kind of stuff. And the orientation mobility serves. My point is, this was all new to me and my family at that time, and at that time when we needed the work that you all do the most, this system was there in ways we never could have counted on, and they helped me figure out where to go to school, college. At that time, this was in 1984, 1985. Students with disabilities had to choose colleges based on whether, the Rehabilitation Act was requiring colleges and universities to provide accommodations, right, for students with disabilities, but you had to go to a place that had good supports or else you might not get your needs met. I think that's changed to some extent, although the program here at the University of Illinois for disability supports is, certainly nationally and maybe world renowned. Not maybe, it is. So it'd be the kind of place people come to for those. And so I had to go to a place where it had those kinds of supports. They helped me choose that. And in the process, just selfish adolescent egocentrism, I became interested in the enterprise of psychosocial adjustment to disability because I was in the middle of that myself, And so I came to study it and became interested in how people and families respond to disability issues, and set up a practicum experience with my VR counselor, and enjoyed it so much I decided to go to graduate school and get a degree in counseling, and then proceeded to stay in that field. I became so interested in it, and I saw it as a good opportunity. And at the time I entered the field, I didn't have much to contribute to anybody else. It was partly to learn it on my own, but I became interested in that enterprise. And so I've been really fortunate and indeed honored to be able to work every day in a field that I know from firsthand experience means so much to people who utilize the services. So this work for me has personal as well as professional meaning, and I know it does to all of you in different ways. So we all come to this for these reasons, but it's just a pleasure and a privilege for me to share this enterprise with you of doing work that is so worth doing, and I know firsthand the impact it has on people's lives. You all do that too, to be sure, but that's what makes it so meaningful. And knowing that, and so being able to give some of that back in some small way is it's just gratifying, and it keeps me getting up in the morning and continuing. And just when we think we've got it all figured out, something changes, right? A new law, a new technology, We'll talk about COVID here in a minute. Things kind of change, and we have to stay current. And so that makes it very exciting and dynamic, and it's always changing. So anyway, thank you for all you do and for being here, and I'm glad to be sharing this journey with you. Did I say I was going to say a little about me? Okay. Enough of that. Next one, please. David, this is just a little bit about my employer, the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. We are Kentucky's University Center of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, have been since the late 1960s. Mission is to promote the full inclusion of Americans with disabilities in all aspects of society and across the lifespan. And we do this through research and training and continuing education, direct service, advocacy work. My job as Director of Research and Training is that I help to oversee 55 funded projects that we have going this year. We have total budgets of about $33 million across those different kinds of projects, so it's very exciting. I've been in this job for 2 years now. I still don't know all the projects. I hope there's not a quiz on that at the end, and keeping track of that is quite a challenge. We have about 300 employees. And in that work, we work in close collaboration with state vocational rehabilitation agencies, state departments of education, other colleges and universities. We're a part of the National Technical Assistance Center on Quality Employment, and I work with Dr. Strausser and Dr. Kashulik and others here at University of Illinois on that project as well. So we all get to work together on these things, and that's just kind of by way of background. David, how are we doing there? Are we on objectives now? Is that
Yeah.
fair enough? So what did we want to do today? 4 objectives. I won't read these verbatim because I can't, but first I want to talk a little bit about opportunities that I think, challenges and opportunity. Challenges we know all about. Opportunities I think we're starting to see that await us as we move and look ahead into the post-COVID era. I hope that's what we're heading toward, don't you? This is enjoyed about as much of this as we can stand, right? I mean, but it's coming, and so there's challenges and opportunities related to that, and looking at what's happening in our economy and how workers with disabilities can take advantage of that. May not be the right word, but in some ways that's exactly what it is. I also want to share with you a 9-step process for helping people start or restart their careers. And there's many processes. This isn't meant to be exemplary in any way. It's one that we use. My wife Amy also works at the Human Development Institute. She and I developed this sequence of career counseling supports for another project we have funded by the United States Department of Labor, where we work with people with mid-career injuries and illnesses, so a little older in the age range than the folks you're all working with. But we found that helping people reorient their careers certainly includes the same process and the same procedures as the ones you would undertake to begin your careers. So wanted to present that as a framework for discussion. You'll recognize all of the work that you do in these 9 steps, and you're going to be like, this isn't all that original, just in the way we've packaged it, and I hope it resonates with what you're doing rather than the other way around. This is not something that I hope people are kind of nodding and saying, yeah, I get that, yes, we do that, and talk about ways that we can integrate these kinds of things. But it's our training and intervention model that we use in this one project, so I wanted to talk with you about it really for your consideration as much as anything else, give some specific details that we think would address the unique needs of young people with significant disabilities, and talk about principles and practices in interdisciplinary collaboration, because I know we have folks who work in public schools here, some special ed professionals, transition coordinators and specialists, some counselors from the state voc rehab program, and maybe a few other folks. Am I getting that right? Is that who you are? That's what Dr. Strausser told me last night. So if you're not, then it's his fault, right? Yeah, okay. So that's what we hope to do. We'll go to the next slide, David, if you don't mind. May I just preface this 9-step process with a few overview remarks about what we see as kind of on the horizon currently for the American disability community. This is what we see broadly, and just to sort of set the stage for it, a few things that I would observe, an answer to the question, what's new on the American disability scene? We know there are 67 million Americans who meet the definition of disability under the ADA Amendments Act, and that's an approximation and probably a tremendous underestimate because this doesn't necessarily take into account everybody who has suffered in so many ways with COVID-19. You know, the ADA Amendments Act now considers post-COVID syndrome or long COVID to be a presumptive disability under the law. So if you have post-COVID syndrome, lingering effects of COVID, following the acute stage of the illness, you are by definition protected under the civil rights guarantees of the ADA. It's a big deal, but it's going to add numbers to the disability community in ways that we've had 80 million Americans who have had reported cases of COVID, right, have been diagnosed formally. We've lost about 990,000 of our friends, neighbors, and loved ones to this public health scourge. So this is going to have an impact on the constituency of the disability community for many years to come. Experts also estimate by that same definition in the ADA Amendments Act that 80% of all Americans will experience a disability by that definition at some point in their lives. And that percentage is probably going to increase over the next 30 to 50 years as the graying of America continues, and we have proportionally and in sheer number more elderly people, because the older you get, the more likely you are to have health conditions that rise to the definition of disability. So we see larger numbers of people with disabilities than ever before. We know that advances in medicine and in medical treatment mean that people with disabilities, with and without disabilities, really are living longer and often more comfortable lives than ever before. You all know in your own work that there are more children being born with disabilities than ever before. We are the whole prenatal identification and prevention kinds of things and advances in prenatal care and ability to care for children who survive high-risk pregnancies and births is the main reason for the increased incidence of children being born with disabilities, because they're surviving births that they didn't used to survive. And this is a very good thing, of course, and many of those children have ongoing support needs as they lead their lives. So we have more children than ever before. We have more people living longer than ever before. We also have the baby boom generation. We have 73 million living Americans who were born between the years 1946 and 1964. And then birth rates started changing considerably after that. So we have large numbers in this baby boom generation. They have one thing in common, every single one of them, and that is they're not getting any younger, right? And so they're aging and they're living longer, and that's a good thing, but we have more elderly people living longer. So that means that we're going to have more people on the outer edges of the age range, and that's going to change the disability experience as well. So I hope there are no statisticians or epidemiologists in here, but I have a bullet on the slide that says the disability community is getting both younger and older. Can you do that? I mean, not at the individual. That sounds like it's like a Bob Dylan song. Remember, I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. I was like, what are you talking about? But that's what's happening. And so if you look at the demographic of the disability community, there's more people in the younger age range and more people in the older age range. By definition, that means there are proportionally fewer people in the middle age ranges. And so as we think about life transitions and things like that, it's important to take into account, the overall population. With that, with increased incidence of disability, and we see this in the psychosocial research that we do. We see that disability is increasingly, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. It is increasingly being viewed for what it is, in my opinion, a naturally occurring and therefore normal part of the human experience. If we were there completely, then we wouldn't have to be studying disability in quite so many different ways. We wouldn't have to think of it as such a mystifying concept. It wouldn't have the stigma associated with it that it does. But as a broader element of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think we're getting there in making that point that people vary in all kinds of ways. People vary based on race and ethnicity. They vary based on height and weight and ability in all kinds of ways. They vary based on their health status and on gender and every other consideration, that there is. And I think there's a growing sentiment that this, if you live long enough, you're going to get a disability. Everyone knows someone who has it. So kind of like, what's the big deal? Well, we're not there yet, but moving in that direction, and we see this in some of the attitude toward people with disabilities literature, and these are very encouraging developments for sure. David, how am I doing? Am I on a different slide here? Have I got my term paper from sophomore year up on that screen, or what?
Just switch.
Next slide. Yes, sir. Thank you. A few other things. What's new on the American disability scene? Won't belabor this, but the Affordable Care Act several years ago removed annual and lifetime cost caps on coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. This was a big deal to the disability community, not a political statement. It's just a fact. People working more than 30 hours per week can have to have access to employer-based health insurance. Another big deal, of course, remember what happened when the ACA first took effect. Some of our largest employers, I won't name names, one of them rhymes with Walmart though, right? They've had all these positions. They were the largest employer in America at that time, more than the federal government. They started posting all these jobs. This is about 2009, 2010. So you got to get 30 hours in order to get your benefits. So how many hours a week was the average Walmart job posted for? 28, 29, right? And nobody can go, beyond that because they didn't want to pay benefits. This current labor shortage that we're in, though, is really a game changer in that regard as well, because employers now need help more than they want to spend time figuring out how to, outsmart the system. But improving access to health care for people with disabilities really is and continues to be a big deal. I would submit to you. ADA Amendments Act, we talk about a new era of civil rights, restoring the original promise of the ADA, right, which happened when the ADA Amendments Act took effect. The big deal thing that they did is they restored the definition of disability to be more inclusive and encompassing, basically brought it back to where it was, in the original version of the ADA, which took effect in 1992. And basically repealed several key Supreme Court verdicts that made it very difficult for people with disabilities to demonstrate that they were actually people with disabilities under the law. So more people with disabilities are now covered and protected by the ADA. And the long-term effects, particularly in the public access provisions of the ADA around accommodations and inclusion, I really think speak for themselves. It's happening in employment, although that's come more slowly. The real change in labor force participation, but these are good things that are happening with regard to the ADA, and the fact that they're including COVID in this as well. So we're going to make sure that people who have had difficulties with COVID aren't going to be discriminated against either. And I think I hope we'd agree that's a good thing. We wouldn't be here today. We might be, but we wouldn't be quite as interested were it not for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, right? The most recent amendments to the Rehabilitation Act really redoubled the state voc rehab programs, and therefore public school entities and transition coordinators and services, but our commitment to transition age youth, right? 15% of all budgets in state voc rehab agencies have to be devoted to services for transition age youth. The strong emphasis on community-based employment, competitive integrated employment. Many of you are involved, I'm sure, in providing pre-eligibility transition services. It's not the greatest acronym really, but at our institute in Kentucky, we're a vendor to the state voc rehab program for pre-ed services. We can serve young people even before they become eligible, right, for VR. That's a big deal. Start services earlier, as young as 14 in earnest, and all of the career exploration, the career awareness component of Dr. Strausser's Illinois Work and Wellbeing model, right, really comes to fruition there, and we can start this in a real partnership between schools and VR agencies around pre-ed services. Are y'all finding this to have changed considerably in the last few years? Is you're starting this younger with your students and clients and moving in that direction? I'm asking, everyone's nodding their head, but I can't see it. Like what, David, what? Don't need to get into WIOA, right? We're all in the middle of it. Fair enough? How about, going down the bullets here, how about the 14C provision, right? The sub-minimum wage situation. You know, look what's happening in our society in general. Several years ago, there was some talk during the presidential primaries, right, about a $15 an hour minimum wage across the board. That didn't really take. But what's happening with the national labor shortage now as we move forward in the post-COVID era, right? In effect, the minimum wage is becoming $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour. And the higher the minimum wage goes up in general, folks, doesn't it make it a little even more disingenuous to be paying someone 27 cents an hour to be working in a sheltered or congregate setting when everyone else is now making more than they used to? And so we are, and RSA now has a whole round of grant applications state agencies can apply for, multi-million-dollar grants to help improve the pathway from the sub-minimum wage to competitive integrated employment through supported and customized employment if necessary. But you know, ending once and for all, in my opinion, is a disgrace of not paying people real wages for real work. And of course, WIOA wanted to do that. Remember when the law took effect or was passed in 2014, they said, okay, by 2016, we want to close down all sheltered workshops in America, right? And what happened? In 2016, they said, well, how about we close them all by, I don't know, what was it, 2018, right? How about we do that? And then 2018 came, and they're still not. We're getting there, and it's the emphasis on competitive integrated employment, and it's working on this sub-minimum wage situation that I think is really helping to move the needle. I see these as encouraging things, and they're partly, interestingly, I think, this impetus is being driven by the fact that wages are being driven up. Of course, inflation is being driven up too, but wages coming up, and that overall is a good thing. Next slide there talks about supported customized employment. We've got that there. I'd like to pause right now, and I wonder if any of these reflections are consistent with any of your own experiences. We'll take just a moment. I'll catch my breath, David, if anyone has a hand. You all seeing this in your own work, and have I overemphasized the importance of WIOA to the transition enterprise? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Oh, next slide. Thank you. Anybody else? One at a time, David. Oh, hands are all aloft, I know, and so we'll just, you pick. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to assume that we're kind of on the same page. How's that sound, all right? We'll go to the next slide if you don't mind. David, thank you. Thanks for the prompt. That's helpful. A few other things we know, and this speaks to, I think, what's happening now and just new trends on the horizon for the disability community. We know that the number of college students with disabilities, I'm talking right now about matriculated college students, the number of students with disabilities matriculating into post-secondary education has more than quadrupled since 1980. So in sheer number and in greater proportion, we have more students than ever before coming to our colleges and universities. We're also changing our conception of what a college student, who and what a college student is, what their background should be, what constitutes a college education. And this is what we see as part of what I call the inclusive higher education imperative, where you see students with intellectual and developmental disabilities come to college and university campuses in greater numbers than ever before, taking training, certificate programs, degree programs, availing themselves of all the same opportunities for socialization, for career training. Everything that a college or university has to offer is being opened to students who weren't thought of 10, 15 years ago as college material, right? Well, guess what? They are now, and they're coming to our campuses. We have a large program for this at the University of Kentucky. I'll bet you all have one here too at the University of Illinois, and we're seeing this, and this is really encouraging. So post-secondary education is now a viable option for students who we didn't think of in that way. We had to just send people to work. Well, now they can take formal training in various ways. See this just as a really encouraging development in our business as well. With all of this, we see, I think, everything that we're talking about here, I think, underscores a greater societal commitment than ever before to social justice, to full participation, and to the inclusion economy, the enterprise of accommodating and creating inclusive workplaces, whether this is in the workers' compensation system, where we're seeing the benefits and have for years of helping injured workers retain to their jobs and their customary careers. Are we one back? Sorry, I may not have. We're good. We good? Okay, sure. Whether that's in the workers' compensation system, helping older workers return to work, employers wanting to provide services and supports like the project that Amy and I are working on now for people with non-work-related mid-career injuries and illnesses, and also in the transition space. The competitive integrated employment emphasis, I think, also moves us in this, in this direction as well. And we see this as a very, very encouraging development there. Of course, we won't talk we're going to talk more too about COVID-19 and its impact on the disability community. Really had a disproportionate impact on people with pre-existing conditions, now as its own disabling condition, right? So I'm tired of giving and hearing presentations on COVID, but during the COVID era, if you're talking about disability, you're talking about employment, you're talking about education, you're also talking about COVID. So you have to have that on the table. And COVID as part of the disability experience is it's an interesting subject, it's important, and I'd love to close the whole book on it and just move on. And I want to talk about this thing in the rear view mirror maybe next year or the year after. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. With all of this, the disability community itself has changed quite dramatically over the past 40 years or so in terms of its constituents, in terms of the types of disabilities that we're seeing. More developmental disabilities that are acquired either in the birth process or in the early stages of life, right? And also more age-related health conditions. And there's this concept of emerging disabilities that many of us have examined and studied because we're looking at the whole broad constituency of people with disabilities, and it's not the same group as it was, 30 or 40 years ago. 22 years ago in the year 2000, there were 17 million Americans with some form of diabetes. Right now, there's 32 million, almost 10% of our populace, okay? Look at autism spectrum disorder. I was born in 1968. That year, 1 out of 6,800 children born would be diagnosed with autism. And now you see it on TV all the time. It changes all the time. Are we like somewhere around like 1 in 40? Children born? Is that right? Is that pretty close? You all would know. Some of you would know more than I. Something like that. 1 out of, and more common in males. Well, that's just been a tremendous change, and so the profusion of autism spectrum disorder diagnoses changes the landscape of the overall population. And I know diagnostic criteria have changed, and some of the kids who didn't used to be diagnosed with autism now are. I do understand that. But it's just changing in terms when we talk about the disability community, that's different. And we see more and more young people with autism coming to our colleges and universities where they just simply didn't used to do that, weren't on campus. So pursuing post-secondary education and the needs kind of continue to change. So staying abreast of that as well. How are we doing over there, David? Are we on the next one now? Yep. Okay, and what time is it? Thank you very much. Thank you. And we do believe that it is a great time to be working in this field for all of the reasons that I mentioned here and a few others. There's an image on this slide that has a train, is that what it is, David? Kind of coming out of a tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know if that's a good metaphor or not. We've been wanting to talk about the post-COVID era for a long time. We're not quite there yet, but cases going down, and then just when they go down, what happens? A new variant, right? It spikes up, you know, put our masks back on, a new mandate. We're going to be dealing with this for quite some time, but in many parts of the country, cases are going down. The Omicron variant, which was very contagious, brought with it more mild symptoms than other variants. The death rate is way down, thankfully. And so we're starting to see this starting, you know, really having an effect on reopening. You know, look at the, you know, masks are kind of voluntary and open, but we're just seeing it, you know, not as much. And people, you just can't be isolating and can't be protecting ourselves in that way for too long. And I think people just kind of got sick of it, no longer required on the airplanes anymore, right? And then a spike will happen and they'll require them for a few weeks, and we're still kind of doing this, but it's changed, I think, in a lot of ways. And regardless of cases, we certainly are reopening and we're moving forward in that way, aren't we? We talk about the reopening of society, this emerging full employment economy, you know, the unemployment rate, which is really kind of a crude measure of the employment situation, not the best one, but 4% unemployment or so at the time of that the pandemic started in February of 2020, got up to 14% in the middle at the height of the pandemic. And it's now around 4%, and 4% is usually viewed as sort of a full employment economy. Remember, unemployment rate is not to be confused with the rate of labor force participation. The unemployment rate is the percentage of available workers who are receiving unemployment benefits at any particular time. But it does give us an idea of how many people are out of work, and we had 50 million Americans displaced from their jobs during this pandemic, and many of them have gone on to other jobs, and new jobs are being opened in various ways. But that's a lot of people and a lot of transition that was happening, and we're on the other end of this, where we're seeing this the reopening economy, the national labor shortage. You drive around, I mean, this is like why it's a great time to be working in this, because we don't really right now have to convince employers to give people with disabilities an opportunity to work. Are y'all finding this in your work? We are in our statewide project where we're working with 3,200 job seekers in Kentucky with various disabilities. And a lot of training and rehab counseling. Those of you who went through programs in this, or some of you here who work in these programs as well, we'd have these courses and books on employer relations and how to sell the employer on the notion of inclusion, that it's that workers with disabilities are productive, right, and accommodations don't cost much, and it's the right thing to do, all of these things. What are employers saying now when you approach them about hiring someone? I'll ask you. Anybody? Where are they, right? I mean, we've got... Say it again, sorry? Sure, because the opportunities are available. Someone over here had a comment?
I was going to say, sometimes we have to talk to them about, like, cutting hours back, because it's like you're just trying to find a part-time job.
Right. And you're like, hey, I'd like to talk, you know, it's like you had me at I'd like to talk to you, right? I mean, someone over here? Did I? No, I didn't. I didn't hear it right. we see this more and more, and and people who do placement work, we're not used to that. We want to go and give them the whole wrap, right? We're like, wait, let me just, and it's, what do they say in business? When you've made the sale, stop talking, right? And employers are saying, and I'm referring over here to Amy, she's the clinical supervisor. She has 10 counselors, rehab counselors, who are out working with employers and helping people to reorient their careers. There's a really interesting phenomenon that's happening. We'll have one worker, we're trying to get this person placed, and they go to, Amy, it's Toyota, isn't it? Toyota in Georgetown, right? Kentucky. We'll say we have one worker, this person's interested in this particular job that's open, and they say, I've got 7 jobs open, So like, which job does this person want? And how about customized employment opportunities here? When the employer has 7 jobs open, you've got one person who's qualified and capable of doing the work. Why can't you carve those things out? Well, guess what? You can. Employers are also telling us something that's a little troubling. You never heard this before, is so we'd say, well, all right, we have someone, I know you need 7 people, but we've got one, and she's an excellent worker. The employer says, don't care. Even if she's not that good of a worker, we'll still take her because no one's in the job right now, right? So give me somebody who will show up, even some of the time. I'll be flexible. They want to work at home. They want to do these kinds of things. So that kind of flexibility, willingness as a matter of necessity, and even the help wanted signs are kind of interesting. It's like, instead of just like now hiring, or people will post one job, they'll just have a sign like hiring all the time or something. You see these? It's true. Like Kraft, the big Kraft, is that a factory or a plant? Kraft Heinz, right around the corner here. We saw that, and you look at businesses, and I said to Amy, we were driving, I said, I wonder if they're hiring. She's like, well, there's a big sign that says, and it'd be interesting to know how many jobs they have open and what kinds of positions. I just think this is a real panacea for this kind of work, and you're already doing this, making these connections, but the dialogue and the sales pitch and everything about what we do has changed by virtue of these opportunities. And your point over here about people with disabilities starting their own business, and we're seeing a proliferation nationwide in the state voc rehab program about entrepreneurial and self-employment ventures as well, because the opportunities are really wide open. David, where am I on these bullets here? Let's see, I've got, need for younger workers. Because of the changing age demographic of our society, we've got many people aging out into retirement, right? And that means that the people who are of working age are more essential than ever because they have to support and drive the economy. So young, qualified, capable, high-energy workers, that's who employers are relying upon. They know that's where the demographic is going to be. They also love hiring older workers, by the way, and there's a lot of them too. There's plenty of opportunities for everybody. How about this next bullet down here?
Flexibility.
Yes, and we talk about the need for flexibility and the importance of flexibility, and we don't have to be flexible. The employer has to be flexible. This is really, it's just really kind of shifting in 2 years. It's just changed that much. But how about this? 20%, I saw this on TV the other day, and I thought it was wrong. This can't be true. 20% of all American workers have changed jobs in the last 2 years. Raise your hand if you've changed jobs, even in responsibility, in the last 2 years. I'm just curious, would you? David, how many?
I'd say almost half the room.
Half the room. I have too, yeah. Half of us, okay? So we're overachievers, I guess, right? Because 20%, and now about half of us have changed jobs in the last 2 years. Why did we do this? Opportunities, right? Things happened around COVID. New things that took place, had to quit for a while, got displaced, any number of reasons. Here's another one, and maybe you don't want to cop to this, but 40% of people, American workers, would like to change the job they have. How many would like to do that? I'm not doing, well, no. How about that? So is this a time of, is this career, someone over here got a, are you looking for a new job? Right. So is this a bizarre time of career, transience? And maybe these statistics suggest we just can't make up our minds, or all bets are off, right, because of COVID and what's happened and all of these kinds of things. But think of these sorts of opportunities. And young people in the early stage of their career, we know they change jobs more than more experienced workers as well. So the idea of changing jobs doesn't have the stigma associated with it, because half of us who are helping people with their job search, we're changing jobs too, right? So it's okay that our students, our clients, our customers, our participants, that they're changing jobs. Not only is okay, why wouldn't they be looking at those kinds of opportunities? And employers are trying to become more loyal to the workers out of need and necessity, but workers don't necessarily have to have any loyalty to the employer because they have all these choices. I really think these choices are a good thing, and so it's very, very encouraging. David, can we go to the next slide, please? Bear with me just one moment, folks. What's the next bullet, David? Work at home and telecommuting. Okay, we've kind of been talking about this, but here's the flexibility part, right? Look at the options and opportunities: self-employment, entrepreneurial ventures, but working from home, telecommuting. Do you have the technology that you need? Here's opportunities people didn't used to have. How about for people with mobility considerations, mobility-related accommodations, telecommuting, work at home arrangements because of COVID is no longer an accommodation in the disability sense of that, right? Employers had to accommodate in ways they never had to for everybody. So we see home-based telecommuting and those kinds of an interface with technology. Those are opportunities, but also the on-site, the whole reopening part, those jobs are burgeoning as well. The pent-up demand we have to connect with other people, to avoid social isolation, to get out and to circulate. So the jobs are coming in both of these areas. Are you all finding that to be the case too? That was a return. Yes, thank you, thank you. Next bullet, David, I'm lost here.
On-site employment opportunities.
Yep, next one.
Federal legislation mandates equitable.
Yes, sir. So that's what we've been talking about before. I won't belabor that. We have this whole idea, and I see this on my campus at the University of Kentucky, but disability as a concept is getting a seat at the table in these diversity, equity, and inclusion kinds of initiatives. In the workplace too, and people think about diversity, it's not narrowly constructed anymore. We look at multiple identities and words we didn't even use 10 years ago, like intersectionality, right? And the relationship between disability status and other characteristics. We're paying much more attention to this, and this is a positive thing, I think, and employers are having to, because they're having to engage folks who have been marginalized, who have not been represented in full in the labor force. They're having opportunities. Because they want to be so nice, I'm cynical. I don't think so. I think they need workers, right? But let's take advantage of that and find ways of doing that as well. The very last one, David?
Employers are more receptive to hiring and accommodating qualified and productive workers.
I guess I already covered that. I'm way ahead of myself even, right? It's just kind of where we're at, and this is really, really encouraging. Tell me the time, will you? I can't subtract. Okay, and we're supposed to be done at? 9:45, all right. We are rolling. So we have this 9-step process, right? So that's 1 minute and a half for each of the 9 steps, and we should be fine. We'll go for break, and then we'll have lunch. How's that? Okay, not bad. So 9 steps. I was going to ask David to read out these 9 steps, but I'm going to go through each one, kind of hit them fairly quickly. This is, and again, actually this discussion that we're having here so far, this is the stuff I really do find interesting and exciting, and what kind of drives the new sorts of developments. This is a way of sort of organizing the things that, that we do. So bear that in mind as I click these off fairly quickly. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on steps 1 and 2. So if you go past, David, the first slide, which is all of them, and go to 1. Yes. So here, step 1, in working with someone who's starting his or her career, the concept of the dream job comes in. And this is an action of opportunity here, okay? just like people now have more choices than they ever had to do, maybe now we can get to those career development ideals. Remember all the theories of career development, that work and career choice are expressions of our personalities. They're expressions of love, right? Teddy Roosevelt said the highest form of satisfaction is to find work worth doing, right? The things that get us most excited. And this notion of a dream job. Well, in an economy where people are being left out of opportunities, the idea marginalized workers don't get to think about dream jobs, doing the things that mean the most to you, right? But now we have an opportunity to do that, and stepping back and looking at those broader notions of, is the job you're going to, is it really the thing? Can we find a way to get you paid for doing what you really love to do? And so working with young people, and they may not know what they love to do vocationally because they don't have any experience, but they know what their interests are, whatever those might be, right? So we look here at their positive strengths, assets, virtues, all the positive psychology kinds of things. In step one, we don't want anybody getting too realistic. That's not what it's about. It's really about finding out what is it that gets you excited. And in the most creative sense, can we find a way to help you get paid for that, right? So what are your interests? What were responsibilities? What prior experience do you have? What experiences did you have growing up? Did you have household chores? Were there certain ones you liked? Were there ones that you didn't? Other kinds of responsibility, what kind of toys did you like to play with? What sorts of movies? What were your occupational daydreams, right? Did you want to be an astronaut or a cow person or, any of that stuff, right? Let's talk about that because we've got some options here, right? Look at these huge employers are hiring in all these different positions. So let's not limit ourselves. We love to do this ideal day or perfect day scenario. If you could sketch it out, it's good for long car rides across the Midwest, actually, and we did this while we were driving from Akron. But what would constitute a perfect day from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed at night? What would that look like? Are kids really reflecting on that and projecting out in that same way? And if not, can we encourage them to do that? Partly because the options are wide open, and partly because vocational psychology tells us this is going to be the best match when we find people work that really gets them excited. So I'll leave that one, David. Next slide, please. Step two, who is doing your dream job? Who is that person? Talk in the disability community a lot about role models and the absence thereof, and with a 29% rate of labor force participation among working age adults with significant disabilities, I see why we have a limitation there. We've got a long way to go as far as that goes. But who is it who's doing the job you would like to do? And how do we go about finding out who that person is? This is where the old-fashioned things like work-based learning comes into play, right? The informational interviewing, the job shadowing kinds of work that we used to do and still do in helping people reorient their careers. How do we identify that person? Finding a mentor. Does the person need to be working in your same field? Not necessarily. Does the person have to have the same disability as you? Not necessarily. Whatever it is you might be looking for, commonalities do bring people together in that way. And how about the fact that the mentor doesn't have to be in person, right? This can be virtual, and making those kind of connections in that way. How do we go about finding who, and that's one of the challenges in the early career exploration things, is find that person. Now online, in various ways we can go about doing this. Find the person who's doing what you'd really like to do and learn from him or her. Ask them what the job is like. See if it really is what you have in mind. Maybe that's not, maybe you think it'd be a great job and it turns out that it wasn't, but let's find this out early on in the process. And if that doesn't work, we'll find another dream job for you. Next step, please. David, here's the kind of nuts and bolts of this, having to do with the career portfolio, developing a resume. We all get that. I think for certain kinds of positions, we know a resume isn't required. Employers are hiring like right on the spot. I think everybody ought to have a resume as a way of presenting themselves, to the world. We can do this in an accommodated way, but a professional resume helps anybody, even if they're just getting started. We look here at reference as well and collecting them, and these kind of questions like, did they know they're your reference, right? That's really important. These sorts of things, Someone's laughing. Do you ever get a call and the person didn't tell you and you didn't think they're that great, but you want to be nice about it, but you're not prepared? I'd love to know, if you tell me what you're applying for, I can give it, a little more thought, right? This is not intuitive though. People don't know it until we tell them. And so looking at how you ask references and what you use them for certain things and how you inquire, if I use you as a reference, would you be able to recommend me positively, right? You don't want to ask someone to say, can I use you as a reference? And Dr. Strouser says, yeah, you can, but if they call me, I'm going to tell them you're no good, Well, that doesn't help, right? So also, and this is things I think young people don't think of in quite the same way as we do as we move forward in our careers, but part of that career portfolio, what are activities that you've been involved with that you can keep, you can take photos of, whatever. It might be written work from your courses. It might be transcripts if you're a particularly good student, certificates of completion from various activities, group work you've done, other projects, those kinds of things. These things, you think employers wouldn't want to see that, but they do want to know about that. And you want to find folks who are busy, who are engaged in things. And I talked before about your interests and all of that. This kind of speaks to that in this same kind of sequence. So developing within this broader career portfolio, all of these kinds of materials. You create your contacts that you've made. You keep track of in an electronic file, and whatever technology might be needed to make that happen. We want to make sure people have access to that. Just a brief word about social media, Facebook accounts. How many of you know folks who you see stuff on their social media and you're like, oh, geez, we don't want to see a picture of that. Okay, fine, you went shopping at Ross, Dress for Less, and then you went to Outback. Not that interesting, but an employer's not going to cringe when they see that. But there are certain things you see pictures, and it's often of young kids, right, they're sitting at a table with like 12 beer bottles in front of them and things. It's just really not that flattering, And email accounts, are you all running into this sometimes with and email accounts too, like partyanimal98, at Gmail. That just doesn't really get it, and they might overlook you on that basis. So make sure that, that's having some, is someone over there oh, is that you? Party animal? Oh, sorry, bad example. But making that, professional and doing that, and until young people, I think too, sometimes you just have to be told, or you don't know that, and whatever accommodations are required for that. But what you're posting on social media can and certainly does come back on you, right? And we've all made mistakes, sent wrong email to the wrong person, put stuff up that we're not supposed to. It's just the new way of doing things, but just attending to that we think is very, very important. Next one, please, David. Do your homework. Yes, let me just make sure I'm moving along here. Here we talk about the need, and students are good with this anyway. They're used to it. So we do the homework. We go finding ways to go find the dream job. Pardon just a minute. We like the ONET system. I didn't talk about the ONET interest profiler or the self-directed search earlier, but the interest assessments. Here, folks can arm themselves with information about local labor markets. This is really, really important. Next bullet, please, David, if you don't mind. On that one. Sorry. Keep going.
For your geographical radius.
Yeah, okay, this says radius, and I don't recognize that word, yeah. So looking at issues of transportation and where the jobs might be, right? How we go about doing that, how we determine how to kind of specify the job search. What are other resources? The VR liaison, the business liaisons in the VR program. Does DRS have those? You have your business folks, what do you call them? Here in Illinois, the folks who run the business networks?
Business consultants and business planning and development.
Yeah, so they're responsible for developing job leads kind of in general, right? Building relationships, but also know who's hiring in particular. We think, we see transition coordinators being very important in this regard as well. Chambers of commerce, Rotary clubs, always like to contact them. These are influential community leaders who know, where the jobs are. I've got 2 bullets down here on job fairs, and the job fair has changed just dramatically, hasn't it, in the last a few years. It's all virtual now. A lot of them are virtual now, but hiring people on the spot. All you got to do is link people up to meet this labor resource that's required. We are running out of time, and I'm running out of breath. I'm going to number 5 now. We're going to go really quick. Ask around, do your homework on employers as well, okay? Talk to people who work for that company, the online employee ratings and things like that. Is the employer known for diversity, equity, and inclusion and accommodations? Some employers are better than others at that and have better reputations. COVID policies and practices, do those make any difference? What is it that we need to do there? Is that some people that may matter? Their willingness to accommodate, et cetera. Very, very important. This has become more important in recent years. I don't think it's because of COVID, but the last few years in particular. Are the politics of the employer important to you or to your family? And we take these things into consideration. A lot of us, 40% who'd like to change jobs, might be because of that. And we don't want to work at a place where we don't kind of agree. David, next one, please. Number 6. This is about applications. I can get you slides on all of these, folks. I'll get it all to you. This is just information about making applications, the online forms. And I apologize, David. I had a couple other image slides in there that we skipped over. So sorry about that, but you're doing great. The online forms, making sure that people are connecting in those ways. When in doubt, get it in there. Get generalized information. Even if we're doing this on people's behalves, even if they're getting accommodations, these principles, I believe, about doing your homework and making applications really are universal, and we want everyone following those same procedures. Moving right along, next slide. I promise we're getting there. This is interview type stuff. And again, I can send you all these out and we can elaborate on these at another time. But preparation for the interview, understanding this is the time to put your best foot forward. Your only obligation is to give the very best impression of yourself possible. Speak positively. Humility, modesty, only in moderation. I don't know if that's a bit of a paradox, but you don't get extra for that, right? What do they say? If you did it, it ain't bragging, And that's the time to put it forward and to make the best impression you possibly can. Even when they ask about your weaknesses, which they will do, turn it into a strength, right? I treat my mother far too well, or, right? That'd be a good one, wouldn't it? But, I find that I will oversubscribe myself, or I'm too hard on myself. Don't we want employers like that employees like that who hold themselves to high standards? So there's right and wrong ways to answer some of those questions. All kinds of websites on commonly asked interview questions and answers, and in grade A, B, C, and D answers, familiarizing people with that. I know in many cases we're making the placements on behalf of our students, our clients, our customers, but they can be involved in this too. And this is also when we accommodate through an interview and we're talking about people's strengths on their behalf, we need to apply these same principles and strategies as well. Do you have any questions for us at this particular time? The answer is always yes, coming up with a couple of those, and how does that work as well? Home stretch, I promise, disclosure, all kinds of stuff. There's some presentations here on accommodations and disclosure. I won't belabor it, but the bottom line is the worker himself or herself has to be most comfortable about how to present one's disability status. We break this on whether the disability is apparent to others, visible and invisible disabilities, don't we? We talk about it in terms of whether you have a need for accommodation, because the law says if you don't need an accommodation, you don't ever have to disclose your disability status. That's important to know, but making that personal decision. Avoiding over-disclosure with all the labeling and documentation that we have to do in our work, right? We really do get to the point where sometimes we're over-disclosing on behalf of the student or the participant, and sometimes they internalize that and they do it too. Generally not a good idea, and they have to be comfortable with it, is really my point. I promise, we're done. Part 9. Starting the new job. These are just kind of negotiation strategies when you're starting that work. Again, because the job market is so wide open, because it's so flexible right now, we can negotiate start dates. Might be able to negotiate salary, benefits. the nature of work and how that's done. Do you need accommodations? Do you need technology? What are the benefits of the job? But also, how might this affect your disability benefits as well? So the whole benefits outreach planning kind of stuff becomes really, really important here. I'm sorry I gave the 9 steps such a short shrift here, folks. You've been very patient in doing that. Great pleasure to be able to talk about these sort of broader issues, though, with you for a little while here. I'll go to the very last slide, if you don't mind, David. And this is a photo of Robert Kennedy. Do you see that? We're going to go back. I'll leave you with this, folks. Robert Kennedy said, "Some people see things the way they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and say, why not?" Well, folks, I want to just leave you this morning simply by thanking you on behalf of your students, their families, your customers, your clients, your participants, consumers, whoever you're working with, the entire disability community, for everything you do all day, every day, to help people with disabilities say why not too. Why not make seamless transitions to adulthood? Why not work in rewarding and meaningful careers? Why not participate fully in safe, affordable, accessible, and inclusive communities? Why not enjoy all the privileges and benefits of membership in this great society of ours? Why not? Thank you for everything you do, folks. Don't you dare think it doesn't make a difference, and appreciate your time and attention. Thank you all. Enjoy the conference. Thank you.